Absolutely.
We've got any apologies for absence?
It's an hour.
Of course, so Councillor David Bradson and then Councillor Tony Rawdon with
10 minutes.
Councillor Hilary Vickers attending as substitutes.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest? No, thank you. We haven't got minutes to approve on this one, do we? No. And that's it. Right, we'd like to welcome the Mayor to the committee. Now questions.
I was allowed to do that.
I know Glyn has to go up, so I'm going to ask. I'm going to let Glyn ask the first question if you can.
That's very good of you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I was going to ask a question about the fact that this is probably the largest conurbation in Europe without a Waitrose or a tram system. Perhaps you might want to comment on that. But one of my colleagues in Mass is very concerned about the bridge over where the railway is, where there's been some development. I wonder what your role could be in ensuring that there is some progress made so that we avoid all the problems that are likely in that area. I suspect you may know about this as well.
Which bridge is this, sorry, Councillor?
It's the railway bridge near Mars Station.
No, I'm not familiar with the detail of that, but happy to.
Perhaps. I mean, the Waitrose is a trivial question, but the tramway system then.
I mean, I'm not aware of the detail of the bridge, but obviously the team are happy to pick that up because the relationship that I have, but in particular the officers have with Network Rail and others, is going to be quite important to be able to help them block whatever the issue is there.
Yeah, the issue is there's been a huge housing development nearby, so consequently the amount of traffic and so forth, especially going to the school, is an issue. It's been an issue for quite some time for the Mass Council represented of our Lib Dem party.
Right.
Okay.
So I think, again, not going much into the detail, there's probably a couple of parts in that. One is there'll be a scheme or a system that the council will have built into the planning decision on traffic movements, which I'm sure we can disagree with because it's the nature of planning decisions.
It might be a first if there isn't some consequential work done on transport, whether it's a housing development or even schools or doctors and so forth.
No, I appreciate that. So there's probably a wider conversation, and I can get. I'm just making a note because I'll get my team to pick up to find out the details from the council to see if there's anything we can help assist with works that they're looking at doing or not doing. And again, working with the likes of Network Rail, if there was expansion, etc., we can help with the government bodies on that side of things. I think more broadly, there's a conversation that's kicking off now with the Devolution Act having received royal assent. There's a process coming over the coming months, which the team are now kicking off as well, in particular around, what would you call it, kind of the growth strategy or the development strategy of the region. So one of the powers that is in that Devolution Act is the establishment of a spatial development strategy. So this is a document that sits above your local plans and your local council areas, and the combined authority has to establish in effect a spatial development strategy for the whole region. And then when you're adopting your local plans as they come up for renewal, the local plans must take into account what is in the spatial development strategy. It cannot contradict what's in the spatial development strategy. Now, it's probably worth, Chair, having an informal or maybe in one of your formal sessions, inviting Jonathan Spruce and the officers along to maybe take you through some of the detail of what that's going to look like, because one of the things that I'm doing at the minute is kicking off that piece of work on spatial development strategy. I think the officers have just procured some specialist consultants to help manage some of the evidence gathering, etc. on that. It's going to take some time. There is going to be a new portfolio, just mentioned before the start of the meeting that portfolios will be adopted at the AGM, but there will be a new portfolio for housing, which will include things like planning, the spatial development strategy, etc. That is something that will sit with me because there are mayoral powers, they're mayoral powers, they're my powers, they're not combined authority powers to exercise. The spatial development strategy is a combined authority decision, not a mayoral decision, so it straddles both. So how I'm contemplating that at the minute, speaking to leaders, is it will be a portfolio of mine as mayor, but I will also have one of the leaders having a housing portfolio as well, and I'll work closely with them on that development. It would be really helpful as we start to develop something that this committee looks at that. Why am I labouring the point so much? It's because the spatial, if you talk about Mask Station, for instance, if we wound back 5 years and we had a spatial development strategy in place, the spatial development strategy doesn't say you need to build 162 houses on this field. It's much more broad brush than that. It will say, you know, this area is suitable for housing, this area was potentially suitable for on-land energy generation, these are your transport corridors. It's very broad brush, and the detail goes into the local plan. But if, for example, a site or a broad area says this is suitable for housing, then that would have to be taken into account in the local plan. And then as part of that, that would then link into our transport strategy, transport corridors. So it's a really interesting piece of work that will have a material impact on how councils develop and manage their local plans, deal with planning applications. And when you overlay that on top of the planning powers that I'm getting to something called Mayoral development orders, which I can grant my own planning permissions, separate from local councils, but I can also call in planning applications from the council, either to determine myself or to overturn a decision of the council. It's quite a big piece of work, it's quite important, and I think Overview and Scrutiny are going to want to be very, very close to that. So probably leave that there for now. Probably wasn't the answer you were expecting, Councillor, but it's opened up an interesting conversation from Mask Bridge. On the tram system, I don't disagree, and you'll remember, because you've been around a lot longer than I have, around the Tees Valley Metro proposal, which was probably a little bit over the top. And at the time, very ambitious, but lacks no sense of reality with money and availability and delivery. I think it's fair to say, and happy to get feedback from everybody, that the work that we've been doing on our existing rail system, albeit there's always more to do, is in effect trying to establish what we would call like a light rail system rather than a tram system, using the infrastructure that we've got, which is why we spend so much time and money on our railway stations, the track, the signalling, the realignments, etc., which then increases the rail system that allows then potentially in years to come spurs off, which is still going to be delivered through our existing infrastructure and potentially some new. It's not going to be a kind of a brand new tram system that doesn't exist now, but that's how we've kind of pivoted to try and get to the same outcome, Councillor. And, you know, having done some research on this, it's a pity we've gone full circle, because having done some research, I wasn't aware that there were tram systems in places like Middlesbrough that then were ripped out, and then we're talking about wanting to put them back, and in an ideal world you would, but because of the infrastructure that's now been built up over the last 30, 40 years, if not longer, it's very difficult to put those things back in, but that's always been the approach that we've taken, Council.
I never expected such a long answer.
Can I step in there? Sadly, we've had one member taken ill and had to leave. That makes us unquored. Technically, well, officially I have to close the meeting from this point. We're not quoted. We can continue, if Ben doesn't mind, we can continue. We'll have to ask public and press to leave and turn the cameras off, as it's not an official meeting, but people can still ask questions if they've got questions, as long as Ben is happy to sit around and... I mean,
it's up to you, Chairman.
But they won't be recorded, the answers.
Well, I was only going to say, Chairman, it's up to you. I don't know what attitude you have, but if you were happy, I'm more than happy to keep the cameras rolling and let Dan, as the only member of the public in the room, say it, but I don't know what discretion you have for that.
I'd say in terms of the meeting will actually record, so we don't record informal meetings. So it would be against the usual paradigm, but with Jeanette on the call, if she's content, we can continue the recording. We'll just know from this point it's not a meeting, it's not a formal session, so I'll pass over to Jeanette to make a decision on that.
Yeah, that's fine, if the mayor's content to go ahead, and we can, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to, I don't think it's my judgment, I think it's the Chairman's judgment.
Well, obviously we're all here, so we'll... As long as the press in the room, if they make note that the meeting stopped being quorate, so it's an informal meeting from that point onwards, and that's fine. We'll just continue as long as Jeanette's happy with that. Yeah. Okay.
The meeting's ended.
No, we're going to continue.
The formal meeting.
The formal meeting's finished, but we're going to continue informally. Sorry?
If you don't want to
I'm
speak.
not going to spoil anything by leaving.
No, you can leave if you wish. I know Glyn has to go as well.
I have got a question for the mayor.
Okay.
Might hand it to you, no, please, Jim.
Right, okay, we'll move on because I know other people have got questions, so I'll ask Lynn.
Yeah. It's a mic on, yeah. Right. So first I'm going to thank the Mayor for actually providing a dedicated social value contracts officer, because I know in the last meeting we did talk about what's the outcomes, what's the impact of the investment that we're making across Tees Valley. So thank you for that. And my next question, I suppose, relates to the amount of investment we are putting across the Tees Valley, so it's transport. So I was at a growth committee meeting, scrutiny meeting last week, and we got a presentation on transport, and it gave you the figures, and it was nearly £1 million that's come this year through the government's transport funding, and then it was about 200 and, can't remember because I haven't, my laptops with IT, there's about 250, 60 on top of that was brought forward from the year before. So that's like a lot of money, isn't it? 58% of that, from memory, was going into the Darlington Link Road and Tees Works. The rest was across different projects. So, as you know, we've been trying to get, and I know there's some study at the moment, we've been trying to get a train station in the East Cleveland area.
Yeah.
I'd just like to know really how we've come to that amount of funding going into 2 projects. Is that detailed enough? And if not, can you provide a little bit more of the reason why 58% of that transport funding is going into 2 projects, particularly Tees Works?
Yeah, of course. So I think just a few clarifications, if I may, Councillor. So I think I've not had access to the presentation you've had, but apologies and feel free to come back if I'm misunderstanding what you're saying, but I think I know what you're getting at. So again, just to refresh everybody, we've signed off now, I think 2 or 3 different times, £1 billion worth of transport funding, first in January 24 and then a couple of times recently, to reconfirm, one, that we're still getting that money, and thanks to both the previous government and this government for reconfirming that. That hasn't gone anywhere else, which is good, because there's always a risk with elections that gets reprofiled, so we've secured that money. The list of projects in the transport plan, for the £1 billion transport plan, hasn't changed since January 24. And that's been agreed by not just myself, but all 5 leaders, and I think some work has been done by both you and Scrutiny on looking at those different projects, and previously has been very supportive of the full list of projects in that. I think, if I'm guessing, and I'm slightly guessing, Councillor, so I apologise, that when we say we're getting £1 billion, we are getting £1 billion, but £1 billion cheque doesn't come from government today or next week or the week after. It's profiled over a 4-year period, and that ramps up over the next 2 or 3 years. So as you say, you know, this year it's £1 million or whatever, but it's buttons really at the end of the day. Then it ramps up next year to over 200, then it ramps up again to another 300-400 million, and then the year after it's another 300 or 400 million, which gets you to the £1 billion. So the question then becomes, we have a list of projects that we've prioritised, which have been agreed, like I say, on numerous different occasions, and again, just as recently as March Cabinet, I think it was, if not February Cabinet, but in the last couple of months. The decision that then needs to be made at largely an officer level is, we have a list of projects to deliver, we have money that's getting ramped up year on year, we need to be able to profile that spend to make sure we spend it, because the last thing you need to do is not spend the money because it doesn't deliver the outcomes, but 2, if you don't deliver the money, the government will take it back off you, and then next time around you get less because you're not seen as being able to deliver against your priorities in the timescales, etc., etc. And to be fair, we've always been very good at meeting those targets, which previously has actually led to end of year spending at government when they've got a little bit of money left down the, well, they say they've got a little bit of money left down the back of the sofa. They often come to us and say, can you spend in the next 6 weeks £5 million and we can pull off a project off the shelf and say yes we can, and that helps them manage their budgets with Treasury, for instance. So there's a whole thing that goes on. What we have to do when we look at that is say, right, we've got all of these projects, but all of those projects are at a different state of development. So let's use the specific examples you've given, because they're really good examples, Councillor. So if you look at Darlington Link Road, for instance, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, there's a lot of work that has been done, there's a lot of work that needs to be done over the next 6 to 12 months so that we can get into construction of that project next year. You know, that is a project that has allocated in our transport budget £250 million. Now, I'm not sure it's going to cost £250 million, but there's a whole lot of work that will refine that. If that budget comes down, that then releases transport monies back into the transport pot of the priorities. Now, that is at quite an advanced stage. People may or may not have seen that there's an options appraisal report that's been published just in the last few weeks about the routes that looking at that we're going out for consultation on for the Darlington Northern Link Road. There's been a consultation before, there needs to be a new one, there's a whole process with government. So that has advanced quite a long way. So when we get the money, and I'll take your word for it, Councillor, because I can't remember what the budget is, but say the £200 million coming this year, an element of that will have to be spent not just on the consultation but the finalisation of the business plan, and that all is aimed towards sign off by government. Because it's such a big project, we basically get overseen by government on really big projects. They're called retained projects, which government in effect double check your homework, and that's not just for us, it's up and down the country. And we're aiming for that to be signed off before the end of the year, which then allows us to kick in, even within this financial year, potentially moving into construction early next year. So you can see how a substantial amount of that money goes to that project. When we say Tees Works, and again just a point of clarification, Tees Works is not getting any money. South Tees Development Corporation are not keeping any money and not using it for what you would think of as the Tees Works project. There are 3 distinct transport projects that are near Tees Works that need to be done, and they're part of that prioritisation list. So you've got improvements to the trunk road, right from Redcar onto the A66, going down to Greystones Roundabout, which includes the strengthening of Greystones Roundabout for traffic, which obviously impacts all of the people from Redcar and beyond. You have a new leg on the Teesdale Road roundabout, which will expand that roundabout to a 4th leg. That's going to create the lorry park on Tees Works, but the extension of that leg is a public road and is not owned by Tees Works. It's not owned by STDC. It's going to be owned by TBCA, where it's part of the public highway. It goes back to the local authority, etc. So again, just to be clear, none of this money is going to Tees Works. And the reason that, and you're not wrong, the reason that project is, again, like Darlington Northern Link Road, allocated such a substantial amount of the current available money is because those projects will start within the next 2 or 3 months. They are the most advanced projects of everything on that list. So it's natural that therefore they're going to take up the budget that's currently available. If you look at, so if we use the 3rd example, which is the East Cleveland Rail example, completely agree with the council, that is in the list, it is important, it's particularly important to the people of Redcar because the council and Alec and yourself talk to me about it whenever you get an opportunity. So I do recognise the importance, and there's a bit of feasibility work that's been done, there's work being done with Bowlby to see how we can connect that and then expand down to Whitby, etc., down the coast. The honest answer for that is that project being delivered is a number of years away. So saying, well, if we just gave East Cleveland Rail 30 million quid today, it'd all be fine. We couldn't spend the money in the next 2 years on East Cleveland Rail if you gave them 10, 20, 30 million quid, because there's a whole level of work around feasibility. The feasibility at the minute has its challenges, as I understand. After the feasibility, there's then a design piece of work about how do you, given the feasibility, what are the options of delivery of this, what are the cost of delivery. Then you have to go through further designs, in effect like an options appraisal. I'm sure officers would better articulate this than I do, so maybe we can get them in next time to give you a more detailed brief. But that is a project that is going to be a number of years away before you even put a spade in the ground. So naturally, it's not going to have money assigned to it today when it's such an early stage of development. It's not the only one, right? We're not picking on East.
You really like the project, I can tell.
Oh, it's a
couple of years.
No, but it is a really, no, but you're absolutely right, Councillor. It's a really good project, and it goes back to Councillor Nightingale's question in effect about this light rail system. If you're going to do this properly, we have in the region an incredible branch line where we can do lots of really interesting things in isolation, and we're already speaking to our colleagues in, and I'm speaking to Kim McGuinness in the North East about could we franchise our rail system, because it feels more logical to do that, given that you kind of have, even today, like a pseudo nationalised infrastructure system with private operators on top that may be public operators. You know, you're not, other than at Darlington, you're not really impacting the rest of the national network, with a couple of exceptions. If you go north, as you all know very, very well, if you go north on our branch line, it connects in with the rest of the North East, which is why we're having that conversation with the North East. Because to do that properly, you basically have to create a North East rail system. And Kim's up for it, I know the North East Combined Authority up for it, we're up for it, but again, that's a number of years away because that's a really complicated thing to deliver. But there's also, as you well know, that if we do this branch line, naturally, it also kind of creeps into North Yorkshire as well. So we also have to fit all of that in. Now, to do it properly, we have to deliver the East Coast Rail Line to make sure we can do, in all genuineness, the rest of the North East rail system that we're trying to deliver, that would ultimately deliver all of our ambition, which is more of a light rail system of 6, 7, 8 trains an hour across the whole of the region, down into East Cleveland and up into the North East. So, in effect, what you're doing in years to come, in very simple terms, and this is probably a little bit of hyperbole, but in effect, you're extending the North East metro system down into Teesside. And you're using our existing network to extend that metro system. So you in effect create a North East and Tees Valley metro system. That's where we want to get to, and that's why, again, I'm not going on about too much, but that's why the East Cleveland bit is important. It's just further down the line than other projects currently in that approved list.
So, can I just...
You can follow up on that if you...
So I thanked you for the social value dedicated officer. We've talked about over £1.2 billion. I've also received, and it's just come this morning on the Tees Work site, that a commercial terms has been agreed in principle for the new data centre, Anthropy, and that will bring millions and millions of investment. Now the good news is we're desperate as a council to get business rates from the Tees Work site. Desperate.
Don't get me on that.
Yeah, because of children's services.
Absolutely, yeah. Huge
So,
social value in that.
so the positive part of this information I've been sent is that if we are getting the AI site, and it looks like we are, then great, because of the business rates. However, the negative side is the side that you and all councillors have received, is the fact the 90% split.
Yeah.
And again, it's looking like that two people are going to be very rich instead of Tees Valley residents to a certain extent. So we can't change what's been agreed, that's gone. So can you guarantee with your social value officers and your procurement service that the people who are making a lot of money start putting a lot more social value, please, back into Teesside?
So I think, I don't know what reports you're referring to, and I suspect...
It's just popped through on...
Yeah, no, I'm sure there's little to no substance in it, because there rarely is. And that's not about you, Councillor, it's, there are lots of nonsense and rumours floating around, as there have been for some time. I would say, again, just to clarify a couple of things, and I've said this before in this meeting, but I suppose I can put a few more numbers on it now that are real. The public sector and the taxpayer will make infinitely more money than the private sector partners we have on Tees Works over this project. And I'll give you a specific example around social value, for instance. If you look at, and this is something you can take back to your council, I'm sure you're already aware of it, so apologies, but if you look at the business rates that are now already being generated, and so when I say being generated, we at STDC have received the cash. Redcar Council have received the cash in their bank account. As of 2 months ago, Redcar Council are now getting £10 million a year that they weren't getting as of 2 months ago. That's 10 million quid brand new on your bottom line. When you think all of your council tax intake as a council is 70 million pounds a year.
And I did start off by...
No, absolutely, that's a lot of money, but that's the purpose of the project, right? We can talk about private individuals and developers who are actually absolutely incredible at what they do making money. I have no problem with people making money.
No.
If they're delivering tens and tens, if not hundreds of millions of pounds worth of money back to the taxpayer, if they make themselves rich at the same time, we might disagree ideologically on that, but that's capitalism, that's how the economy works, it creates sustainability, and I think what often gets lost, because people people outside of this room have an agenda. If you look in the medium-term financial plan that is publicly available for South Tees Development Corporation, it was adopted back in March, which mirrors the Tees Valley Combined Authority budgets, because obviously there's lots of money that STDC is now paying back to TVCA, so those two things have to marry. And we have a joint Section 73 Finance Director Officer who sits across both those organisations, so those organisations are completely aligned financially. The current business rates that STDC gets is about 11-12 million pounds a year as of today. That doesn't include the 50% that the council get, which is another 11-12 million pounds a year, which it's actually now receiving. Yeah. This isn't jam tomorrow, you're actually getting this money. So the whole nonsense about, oh yeah, well you say this, Ben, but it doesn't happen. This is real now. That's the start of it. If you look at the medium-term financial plan of what we already have signed, so forget rumours about data centres or other projects, what is physically contracted, what's currently being built or delivered on that site, those business rates ramp up to about £45 million a year in 2029. Now that's £45 million a year that goes to STDC. There's another £45 million a year that goes to Redcar and Cleveland Council, right? So in 2029, the taxpayer is going to be making £90 million a year from that site for the next 20 years. That's 2 billion quid. That's on what we've currently got contracted. That's not on future development, it's not on negotiations, it's not on rumours, it's not on, we might sign this deal, but we haven't signed it. On what is actually contracted, the taxpayer is going to make 2 billion quid. That is an order of magnitude larger than anything the private sector are going to make. Now, I just think it's really important to put those numbers in context, because those numbers are real, you can look at those yourselves. I'm sure officers can point you to the medium-term financial plan where that's evidence. I think that draws out two really important things. One, I know you will do this anyway, councillor, but I would encourage any councillor in Redcar and East Cleveland to scrutinise and get much more into the detail at Redcar and Cleveland Council about when these business rates land, what are we planning to do with these business rates, and how can we prepare for that now? Okay, you're getting 11 million quid a year now that you didn't have before, but as you ramp up to 40-45 million pounds, and potentially more, by the way, if other things do sign in the interim, I'm just telling you what's contracted now. I think there's a really important and positive discussion about the transformation of Redcar, particularly around public services, social care, children's care, all of the things that you know much better than I do on the ground. I hope that conversation's going on. I don't see, having been one step removed, that that's going on in a lot of detail. and sorry, Councillor, just on the other side of that, South Tees Development Corporation are also then getting £45 million a year in the next few years from business rates. Now, obviously in the early days, and this is how, and the whole purpose for the joint venture with our private sector partners was set up, the primary objective is to make sure that the taxpayer gets all of the money that it's paid back. So the £45 million that STDC is going to get will go back to repay TVCA for the money it's loaned. It will go back to the UK Investment Bank, now called National Wealth Fund, to repay the money for all of the things. So all of the money that STDC gets, it wants to get to a place where all of the debts are repaid. But after that, and that could be done, in reality, within the next 5 or 6 years, it could pay back the circa £400 million worth of debt that it has. That's how much money it's going to generate. The question then becomes for STDC, what does it do with the tens and tens of millions of pounds a year it's going to get? And what does it do with that money? Because at that stage, there'll be a few bits and pieces to do around some basic infrastructure and some management of the site, etc. But you're talking pennies in the overall scale of things. What is it going to do? What is it going to do with the tens of millions of pounds worth of surplus? And where should that money go? Now, the way development corporations are set up, it is my responsibility as mayor, or whoever is mayor, to set the strategic priorities for the development corporation. And so that basically means I set annually, in effect, the strategy for the Development Corporation, what it should, and what outcomes it should achieve, and the board are there to deliver those outcomes. So there is a conversation to have, and I'm happy to have this with this committee maybe in a separate session outside of Mayoral question time. What am I doing and what are we starting to do around creating a process and a plan for what we do with that money? What am I going to tell STDC to do with that money? The other interesting part of that, just for completeness sake, is the board is made up of the people that I appoint, which is the legislation and the law as calculated at the minute. There is an argument to say, and you can see this through the budget, that there is an argument that, and I'm not saying this is a good argument, my view on this is that we want to do this as quickly as possible, but there is an argument to say that we don't want STDC to pay back its money quickly. We want it to pay back like a mortgage over 20 years. Because then it means that TVCA earns a huge amount of interest out of the loan it's given. A bit like your mortgage, right? If you pay back your mortgage in 3 years, you might pay 30 grand's worth of interest. If you pay it back over 20 years, you're paying hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of interest. Now, if you just scale that up, if STDC can pay back its money in 5 years, TVCA get all its money back plus interest. You have to charge a commercial rate of interest to STDC. But if you pay back over 20 years, that's a whole load of money that's being drawn out of STDC and into TVCA, which I know is of interest to councillors around this table, where TVCA has more control over that money rather than the Development Corporation Board. There's an interesting discussion for TVCA to have around how quickly it wants its money, how much money it wants to draw out, and also, and I don't know the answer to this, Chair, what's that mechanism that the Mayor currently plays in directing how that money is being spent, and what's the process? We haven't even started that yet, because we've just got to this stage where we're now having a conversation internally, say, we should start to have this conversation, what's that look like? So it's a blank piece of paper at the moment, and I think in the coming months, it's not going to be weeks, but in the coming months, there is probably drafts of processes and ideas that I'll be bringing to TVCA Cabinet, and I'd be more than happy to bring here to try and get people's engagement and involvement with what that should look like, because I don't think the thing that I would come up with would be perfect, but collectively I think we can come up with a process and a structure that could really add, because again, we get to a stage where we don't need to spend any money on STDC, so then we're saying, how do we spend the tens of millions of pounds a year in our communities across the region, which was literally the whole purpose of Tees Works, right? Jobs and investment's great, but if you get that revenue stream, then you can go and spend it in South Bank and Grangetown or East Cleveland, or, you know, then all of a sudden you've got more than enough money to not ask government to build a new flyover on the A19 or a tunnel between, you know, all of those things become really, really achievable without having to ask anybody for money when you've got those types of revenue streams. And just to be clear, and I'm not never going to dream, and nobody would ever dream of touching the red half, so let's just talk about the STDC half. £45 million a year is a lot of money. And I think we would collectively, if we just said, here's £45 million a year that we have that's dropped today, what do we spend it on? We'd probably struggle to get that money out the door immediately. But if we have a couple of years, which we do have a couple of years, then we can put plans and projects in place that could be ready to spend that money when that, a bit like the transport conversation we've just had. And again, just to be clear, the £45 million is what's already contracted, not what will be there, because there are other investments and projects that we're working on to deliver. So I would welcome a really open discussion from the committee about that, as well as leaders, to talk about how that could be shaped. And we'll come forward with some ideas, but it's not going to be a fait accompli. It will be genuine ideas where I'll want feedback from all councillors as to how we can make sure that that money is best used to deliver for the whole of the region once the loans are paid back to TVCA. And just to be clear, that's also a huge benefit to all of us, because if we reduce, so TVCA have lent STDC about £260 million. So if we can pay that back, which we will, and all of the budgets show that we can, well, that's £260 million of additional borrowing that we could take out if we chose to at TVCA for other projects within the region as well. So it's not even just about £45 million a year, it also releases a whole opportunity to borrow more money for other projects across the region as well. It's a really, I mean, genuinely a really exciting time, and I suppose you give me a platform to go into the detail of that.
Yeah, and
but I really
see the passion you have for it, so it's a shame, and it is exciting. And for you, Chair, it would be good to have a more in-depth conversation.
I'm sure this committee will be talking about that for the next 12 months,
Yeah.
probably. So, yeah.
Also, I think it's definitely want to build into the work programme.
Yeah.
Once we've got a kind of maybe a start for 10 and some options, I personally think that's a really valuable piece of work that ONS could do around the repayment structure, how quickly, how slowly, and then the realisation of that money is what do we then do with it, and how and when, and how do we make sure that STDC delivers that, or how do we make sure that TBCA delivers that, or it's a bit of both. There's a really interesting piece of work there that I'm sure everybody would be interested in.
Can I move on, please?
Yeah, it's just quickly, it was on the social values. So there has been, we all know there has been a negative side, because we still don't know if the two investors have actually, the two investors who are going to be millionaires, let's be honest.
So they already were before on Tees.
Yeah, well, they're going to be billionaires.
Well, not quite, but yeah.
Have they actually put any money into Tees Works? They have, because that's said, isn't it? They've not put anything in.
Yeah.
So
I mean, there's a lot been lots said that is inaccurate, and that's the frustrating thing, because it creates
sorry,
noise.
Chair, for going on, but
It creates that noise
it brings something that is
appreciates it.
really positive, and you just keep.
Yeah, I accept that, yeah, totally. But I think we do need to move on then.
Can you ask them for the social value when we get the...
Yeah, I mean, I know separately that I'm not involved with this, the Tees Works Foundation has been set up for community projects, and they do a lot of support in Redcrease, Cleveland and Middlesbrough. But again, I'm more than happy to share details with you, Councillor.
Thanks for
We'll move on just so everyone gets a chance.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry, Jim, have you got a question? I'll come this side of the room, because it's not debating, mayoral question time. So if you've got a question, obviously add it in your question when it comes to your turn. Have you got anything, Jim?
No, thank you.
No, Hilary?
No, fine.
Lynn?
Yes, I have, Chair, please. With almost £1 million young people not in employment, education or training, can the Mayor give us an insight into the 652 young people who participated in the Send Enterprise Challenge Week, focusing on work experience, and outline how this 4-year initiative can be expanded and attract more sponsors?
Yeah, it's a really good thing that's been done. Letting those people involved should be commended for all the work that they've done. It's a really great initiative, and I know that working with leaders across the local authorities as well, and working more widely with councillors, there is more that we can start to do at the TBCA level with some of the additional bits of money, which are relatively small at the minute, but that we can help leverage. So the big thing that I would come back to is the Trailblazer deal that we got from government, with working with the Department of Work and Pensions, which was originally £5 million, which in the overall scheme of things isn't a huge amount of money, but that was then extended because government saw that as actually a really good little pilot and gave another £5 million. And I think we've seen over, say, 600 people participate in the Trailblazer, more than 350 instances of work experience, and I went to see a number of young people who were able to get involved in the Trailblazer initiative, and it was interesting. They weren't hand-picked, we just asked for a list and we picked a few out. What was really positive and exciting to see about that was that young people who weren't getting the opportunity of work experience, getting that opportunity because it made it easier for smaller businesses to give them that opportunity. But what was even more exciting, work experience is important and great, but what we were seeing was that young people were actually quite excited about the opportunity they were then getting, and the businesses were excited by the young people. Every single business said, you know, make it up right, little Johnny or little Jane, they've been in now for a month and they're doing fantastically well and they're passionate, they're really good at, you know, we can really see a future for them. And this was only, you know, a few weeks into whatever it was, a 3-6 month work experience project. And they were saying, well, we're going to keep them afterwards and we're going to train them up. So one of the things that I'm still waiting to see is the conversion rate on some of that. It's not going to be perfect, right, but there's definitely something within it. And having spoken to the Secretary of State's Department of Work and Pensions just last week, they're very keen to look at where these Trailblazers have been successful, how we can roll them out further and scale them up, given the national crisis that we're seeing, that the government have talked about, and how we tackle that. And again, all councils have been very helpful and very good with us on that, being able to deploy a lot of that resources, using the councils as the delivery partner as well. Yeah, and I must say then, I do need to give a lot of thanks to Lisa Evans as well, because she did, from a combined authority perspective, drive a lot of the Trailblazer design and a lot of the work that she's done closely with Sarah Walker, the director here. And it does look like it's a very, very good scheme. So yeah.
Yeah, I realised Stockton were leading the way in some ways, and it's down to the outcome. So we've got to roll it out so that as many young people as possible.
And also be honest about it as well. So there are examples where it will be seen to be a huge success, but we also have to be honest and realistic where it hasn't gone as well as we would like, to make sure we tweak it and improve it. So let's not go in with this with rose-tinted glasses. Everything's perfect. There will be good aspects to it, but there are lots of things that won't be perfect and we need to improve. And given the scale of the employment challenge and the socio-economic challenges, and particularly the young people challenge we have in this region, it's something we absolutely have to get right. And I'm sure, again, this committee will pay close attention to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was quite odd. I had a question on needs, but I think they've covered that there. I'll move on to John.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. I'll be as brief as I can, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to add my thanks to Lynn's about the appointment of the dedicated social value officer. I think that links in with the number of comments we've already heard, because for our region for too long, not just recent figures, but for too long, young people have faced the immense challenge of working to get into work, highlighted by the Milburn report in recent weeks. So I go back to social value, and I'd like to mention or ask, within the TVCA and Mayoral Development Corporation's commissioning and procurement structure, certainly under the Social Value Act, potential contractors will have to demonstrate their contribution to social value, but I think that social value could be extended to social and economic value if potential contractors, perhaps we can enshrine in our procurement process good evidence that they will commit to education, training, apprenticeships, future employment. Is that a possibility?
I mean, it absolutely is, and again, I'm sure the team would be more than happy to walk you through it. So my understanding is, and I apologise if this is wrong, but I'm very confident that we did this, something I was equally passionate about a number of years ago, that we max out through our procurement process what we believe we are legally allowed to accredit to social value, which I think basically equates to 20% of a procurement contract value is assessed against its social value sufficient by a contractor or whoever we're procuring for whatever purpose. And we've done that for a number of years, and there are some really good examples as to where that's worked. I know the government are looking at tweaking some of this, and we'll keep a close eye on that to see whether we can maximise it even further. There's a lot of talk about, which slightly less relevant to us, but kind of British first, because we do that anyway. But I think we are a pretty good exemplar, really, of how that goes very, very well. I think what often gets mixed up, though, as well, is where we interact quite heavily with investors, where we're procuring them, we can add that value. And again, I think, for example, on the spatial development strategy, where there was a procurement that's just been finalised and somebody's been awarded, 20% of that contract was on social value, and that's difficult for a consultant to be able to add social value. So it's not just like we're going to employ local people. That's easier on the construction side, because you can say, well, if you're going to build something for us, we want you to use local people, local young people, apprentices, etc. So that all works pretty well. What often gets blended in, which it's just the nature of it really, but is sometimes frustrating, is that where we bring investment, we will speak to investors, which obviously I do on a pretty much daily basis, and when they land, right? So they'll go to Darlington, or they'll come to the airport, or they'll go to Wilton, or wherever they go, they'll go to Hartlepool, right? And you're helping deliver that project, but you have no control because you're not funding the project directly. So, I mean, a really good example, a really honest example, which is where the lines get blurred. If you look at Net Zero Teesside, for instance, right? I've worked on that project and delivering that since August 2017. I mean, it was literally 9 years ago that they started that project. They put spades in the ground 6 months ago, and people will see it's now starting to ramp up. That's on the Tees work side. We obviously have involvement with that as a minority shareholder, but really it's just kind of a land transaction where they take some land, they build a big project. It's further complicated by the fact that they've got a huge amount of grant and subsidy from central government. So people are like, oh well, you've got this great project on your doorstep, let's make sure that local people get great opportunity. What are you doing about procurement? What are you doing about social value? Now the problem with that is, in all honesty, that's outside of the TVCA remit, because TVCA, other than, well, TVCA not at all, but even STDC as a junior partner on the land side, you wouldn't build in on a land sale kind of those types of procurement issues. So people are saying to us, and what I can do is use my soft power to go to Net Zero Teesside and say, look, what are you doing through your procurement strategy on using local contractors, and what are you doing about apprenticeships and skills training, etc., etc. But all of that is soft power, because we can't dictate to a private investor what they do around social value. And so people do complain to me, I suppose rightly so as the mayor, well, where's more access and where are these jobs coming from and how do we get access to them? And Net Zero Teesside, to be frank, haven't been as good as I would like them to be in giving that level of local commitment, because Net Zero Teesside see local content as UK content, not Teesside content. Whereas on the other side of that coin, and they were absolutely brilliant, was SEA. You know, their main contractor, both SEA and K2 is their main contractor. The stats out of that on local content, on apprenticeships, on where people went, it was like 76% of people that physically built that facility from end to end lived within the Tees Valley. When you took a 40-mile radius, it went up to like 95%. When you looked at the local contractors, like where were the businesses based, it was brilliant. I suspect the report that comes out of NZT will be different, and it won't be anywhere near as good. Whereas I didn't have any control over SEA either, but they were much more willing as an investor to understand their responsibilities to the local community, and I don't feel like NZT are quite there yet. And they also have a problem that they've subcontracted to Balfour Beatty, and Balfour Beatty are a tier 1 behemoth, and they say, well, if you want to procure with us, you've got to sign up to our procurement portal and you've got to pass all these tests, which basically is excluding a whole lot of local contractors that could do that work. To give you an example, there's a local-ish, I mean, they're just down they're literally on the other side of the boundary, right? Potters, as an equipment hire company, they do everything from diggers to trucks and all sorts of things. These types of investors would hire in that equipment, and you've got Potters of incredible business that have been around for decades, can barely get a look in, but they're hiring equipment from Liverpool and down south, or sometimes abroad. That doesn't make sense to me. That's not social value, that's not supporting the local supply chains. Whereas I can give you all the examples on the SEA side where they do. So, again, long-winded, where I believe we are currently doing all we can, but happy for Overview and Scrutiny to look into this to see if there's more we can do. Where we can have contractual control, where we procure, where we're doing, and we're saying getting somebody to build something for us, I think our social value is really heavily built in, and I think it's good. I suppose it's that one step removed where people perceive that we should be doing more, but we actually have no legal way of doing so. It's how we're applying that soft power, which again has been working in some cases and working less well in other cases. I think there's a wider conversation which government now recognise. They're putting in billions of pounds worth of subsidy to Net Zero Teesside, but their hooks around social value are relatively limited. And this isn't a new thing. It was the same thing when the offshore wind contracts were issued in the Conservative government. There were no teeth. There's no teeth to any of this. So even when you get businesses saying, we want to do it, they'll put it in a plan and they'll submit it, they'll then get the contract and subsidy and then say, well, it's changed. And there's no bite. The government can't go back and say, well, we've given you subsidy, we're going to hold you to this. There's no legal bite in a lot of this stuff. It was the same with offshore wind, it's the same now with carbon capture. And I'm really worried that we're creating these great industries like we did with offshore wind, but a lot of the supply chains and a lot of the opportunities are not going to be felt here unless these investors get serious about helping us with local supply chains and local content.
If I may,
of course.
Thank you for that response, Mr. Mayor. Can I just ask, as a member of Overview and Scrutiny Committee, would it be possible in the future if officers could, we talk about 20% of every contract around social value, could we have some data analysis of that moving forward for this committee to consider?
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
I think most of that's in reports anyway, isn't it? A lot of it's already in reports.
Yeah, but as you're aware, sometimes, Chairman, these reports can be long and detailed, and I do think there's specific. No, but I also think there is something specific about, in certain circumstances, getting rid of a lot of the report and just having a procurement review report that allows you to have a real serious discussion on procurement. And also, scrutinise and challenge back to us as to whether there are things we could be doing better, because I'm sure it's not perfect.
Cheers.
Thank you. Andy?
Yeah,
2 points I'd like to raise, Mayor. The first one you've almost answered. It was regarding the social value beyond Redcar and Cleveland and TVCA for the rest of the authorities that we have, because a lot of money going in there, a lot of money getting spent there, they're getting a lot of revenue, as you're saying, starting to come up. And I was just wondering how you could reconcile the other authorities as to how they benefit from all that as well, and understand some of the stuff you're saying. But I'm saying our finances seem ought to be going to the east side of the TVCA and nothing coming to the other side per se. But as you say, if you're making revenue, it comes back to TVCA, then the other places benefit.
I think there's a council over here that's worried about the £250 million going to Darwin for the new guy.
No.
That's tongue in cheek, but it's
That's right, I wasn't worried.
I know you weren't. Sorry, I apologise. It's just you're being cheeky.
And the
sorry.
figures right, 58% on 2 projects.
I like your cheekiness, and I like that. It's just the fact that the money that's being spent is long term as well, and everything else. So I appreciate that. That was part of the question. So thank you for that. You explained that to me. So that was a question. The other part, as part of that as well, is the Northern Bypass Road. We're going to have a consultation. We had a consultation before, and a route was selected, and everybody said that was the ideal route. That's a perfect route. That's where we're going to go. And now that route's not even included in the selection process for the next consultation that's going to come up. And people in our area are really scratching their heads as to why that ideal route that was picked before is no longer available, because that was the ideal route. They understand that costs can change, but certainly with topography, the way everything was done, and the consultation that was done previous, selected that route for a reason, and the reason that it was the best route. How is it suddenly not the best route?
That's a good question. So I was making a note so I don't forget to answer it. So on the first part, just for completeness sake, and again, this is nothing beyond an idea currently in my head, but on the social value bit, particularly about, without repeating myself, all of the stuff we talked about on pulling that money out, and how do we make sure it benefits the whole region when there is this huge surplus. What's going on in my head at the minute is that I'm kind of starting to just jot down some ideas before I should probably share it with officers before I share it with you, but I'll share it with you anyway. I'm thinking that I think we are genuinely in a place now where, and I don't know what the mechanism for this is, but STDC should be looking at setting up in effect like a Teesside Wealth Fund. And whether that is then almost, as part of the strategic priorities, I require STDC to set up a Teesside Wealth Fund and dedicate X millions of pounds, tens of millions of pounds into it, and whether that then can sit in effect as a separate body that is funded by STDC, and that separate body could have appointments from all of the local councils, whether it's just the leaders or whether it's regen leads or whatever. I'm just kind of thinking that there's got to be a way to extract into a Teesside Wealth Fund where we can then distribute that funds right across the region. I say that for 2 reasons. One, because that was always the plan and the intention when I spent so much time and effort on STDC, was because I could see the opportunity to us to be able to regenerate the whole of the area, not just there. And also secondly, if I'm honest, is that when we achieve, and now we're achieving what we want, that money that STDC controls probably shouldn't be going to Redcar. Now I'm open to that. It's eyes wide open. But if, for example, if another investment, so let's stick to what we've got, right? In 29, we're going to have £45 million going to STDC. We're going to have another £45 million going to Redcar. And if we're talking about equity, and we're talking about what's fair, TVCA, which was all 5 leaders, both past and present, supported that project by allowing that funding to be provided. Okay? Redcar were part of that. Redcar have always been hugely supportive, and the council have been brilliant. Their planning team in particular has been incredible. So again, this isn't, take this as an issue with Redcar, but from a financial standpoint, not that they ever could, but Redcar have never provided any financial input into that TVCA have. So Redcar absolutely should benefit from the business rates and I don't think anybody should ever dream of trying to suggest that the 50% of rates that go to the council should ever be touched. That is for the council to deal with. But there is an equity argument to make that because TVCA took a punt, because the 5 leaders supported this project in Redcar, and because that financial risk was taken by TVCA, TVCA should see the financial benefit of that, as in the wider regions should see the benefit of that. So it feels to me like Redcar should be allowed to do what they want with their huge sum of money as and when it arrives, but the other 50% should be taught, and this is why I think it will be really helpful to have a wider session with leaders and with yourselves when we start to develop these plans outside of my head. How does that work in practice? It does feel like, okay, maybe not all of it, but the lion's share should surely be going to the other 4 councils, given that Redcar are already then receiving the other benefit of income that they wouldn't have otherwise got. But I think there's something in this Teesside Wealth Fund idea that allows me to direct STDC to set this thing up that then allows everybody to talk about the priorities for the region and how we use that money for the benefit of the region rather than just the site or even the locale within Redcar. It might be controversial.
I suspect
have that discussion.
I suspect the new TVCA investment committee may well be get involved in that.
But yeah, but I know, Mr. Chairman, that you talked about this yourself, that I've got an idea in my head. We've got to get in again. I haven't spoken to officers about this yet. The detail will be from the officers around what is feasible legally within the constitution in the process. Yeah. Because at the minute, TVCA have, in theory, we'll get to 2030, and TVCA have no involvement at all in how those funds are distributed. It's just STDC, which some people are comfortable with. Doesn't feel quite right to me at that stage. It feels like we should be redistributed across the region. So what is the actual legal process, the constitutional process for establishing something that allows that money to be used region-wide, and also, by the way, gets more people involved? Because you could say, well, let's have a Teesside Wealth Fund, and STDC, you run it. Again, that feels a little bit narrow. It feels like at that stage we should have more kind of local authority, councillor, like the region should have more oversight of that rather than just STDC as a body. So I'll put a pin in that for now because there's a whole other process I need to speak to officers about, but that's what we're imagining, a Teesside Wealth Fund where we all across the region have input and decision making on how that money is spent. And that could be somehow in TVCA, it could be separate from TVCA, but that's the concept we've got to get to, where all of a sudden, you know, then all of a sudden we can be really proactive, right? You're not really constrained by money anymore. It's about where is it right to spend the money across our region to deliver the outcomes we want for our people.
Can we move on to the southern?
Yes.
I was awesome. Sorry.
I was only supposed to be a quick update. Apologies, Andy.
That's good. Thank you for that. I mean, it's a concern that people have. And
it is, yeah, absolutely. And I'm very aware of it, which is why we're coming up with ideas to make sure that that's addressed. On the link road, except everything you say, Andy, and you'll know it better than I do, particularly the history of it. I suppose more recently, all I can tell you is the advice that I've been getting more recently as we're progressing this now in a really detailed way is that the officers have done a lot of design work about delivering the outcomes that we set out in the beginning that we wanted to achieve for the link road. And I think, and apologies if I get this wrong, but the advice that I've been getting is that the situation from the original, well, there's two things. The situation from the original consultation to today is different. There's a lot of things that have happened in that intervening period, which one has meant we need to go back out for consultation. So the fundamental need for consultation, the advice I've been getting is, so much water's gone under the bridge, so many things have happened that we need to reconsult. And the second thing is that DFT require us to go out for a consultation separately anyway, because it's a retained project. They want to see that this has all been refreshed and that when we go for their sign-off at the end of the year, that they are happy with the consultation. Now, both bits are equally important for different reasons. Take the second bit, for instance, on DFT. DFT will not approve a project unless it adds value, unless its BCR is appropriate, unless it delivers real additionality. There are lots of very strict technical things that we have to comply with for DFT to sign off. The advice I'm getting on that side of things is DFT will not sign off, which is why it hasn't been included, or one of the reasons it's not been included, on the original route because of the water that's gone under the bridge since that original decision. And to be as clear as I can, because it's a really long and involved process, One of the major issues is that from the original consultation to now, Darlington Council have adopted a master plan for the north of Darlington. And within that master plan, Darlington Council have agreed a significant road infrastructure as part of that master plan. I'm just repeating to you, Andy, I'm sure people will agree or disagree with this. So the advice back to me is, because of that, DFT will turn around and potentially will say, why would we build this much bigger, more expensive road when the council have already agreed that this road is going to go in as part of the master plan? And so you'll have issues with BCRs, you'll have issues with value for money, and the advice that I'm getting clearly from officers is that DFT will not accept that. So when we had that conversation, I said, right, well, if that's the case, then what we have to do is a new options appraisal to look at all of the options about, go back to square one basically, what could this road look like, where could it go, and include as part of the options appraisal the original route. And that's what the options appraisal report that's published online does. And so that's then gone down to the two routes that we've got, and therefore we have to go out for consultation on those two routes, which will go down to one, which will be recommended to DFT. So that's the advice and the thought process through the last few months that gets us to the end of the year.
Okay, well, I'll be opposing it, Ben, because it does nothing, it's not a bypass.
It doesn't surprise me.
If you use that route, all you're doing is moving transport from that corner back to the other corner, to back onto the same nut places. It's not a bypass, it's just another road. I understand the road you're talking about, it's called it's a distributor road essentially, but it's in a housing estate, it's a normal road, but it will connect to another normal road that goes around. The only issue is, there's a bridge goes over a mainline railway, which is the expensive part of it. And I suspect it's that's part of the reason. But it doesn't take away from the fact that we need a bypass. And that road, if it goes anywhere other than up to the roundabout up the top end, is not a bypass. All you're doing is shifting traffic from one side of a gridlock to the middle of the gridlock. And I think it's ridiculous. But I understand what you're saying. Is there any way that that decision will be changed, or will we still be consulting on the two non-bypass routes?
So the work that's been produced and the two suggested routes are the two routes that will be consulted on, and that consultation starts, I think, in the second week of July. Now, a consultation is a consultation, and we'll see where we come, depending on what that feedback is like, and there's more technical work to do. It may be that they don't work, but from the initial the assessment report, that they do seem like the two. I don't disagree with you, Andy. Like, firstly, there are unintended consequences from an assessment to sign off this type of project that Darlington Council have taken that make it more difficult to look at a bypass in the immediate term. And secondly, we've also had now an official response from National Highways, who are saying that they will not grant access to where your original preferred route goes onto the motorway. National Highways are saying no, you will not have access to that. So even if it was the preferred option, we cannot include it because it is not deliverable. And just from a process point of view, you can't include an option for consultation that isn't deliverable because National Highways have just said a flat out no, you cannot connect to our network.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that
question, Sonia. Okay, thank you. Count me. Thanks, Sonia.
Yeah, you can have a whole session. Again, Councillor, I'm more than happy if you or others in Darlington are interested to set up a meeting with the transport officers to take you through some of the detail. If you just drop me an email, I can sort it out for you.
Thanks, Sonia. During the previous cabinet meeting, you said that two Mayoral Development Corporations, the MDC and the HDC, were under review. Can you update us on that? And has there been any conclusions?
I cannot do it, Chairman. There's not a huge amount to update on. So no decision has been made yet. I have set out my reasoning to officers for the review. I've set out some concerns I have around how some of the both development corporations currently operate. For example, in Hartlepool, there's obviously a financial issue which was brought to the budget, and the leaders and TBCA cabinet agreed to continue to support that plan because of the strategic importance to Hartlepool. And in parallel, one of the reasons we haven't got anything back yet is that I asked, as part of the review from officers, for a full financial review, particularly into Hartlepool, and there's a whole lot of work going on in the background with consultants and various others, because when I make that decision, if I was to say, yes, Hartlepool should continue, if it's not financially viable, that doesn't make sense, right? So there's a substantial piece of work going on there. Similar for Middlesbrough, although the finances in Middlesbrough aren't relevant because it's financially sound and that's not a problem. It's more of a strategic question in Middlesbrough about wanting to review who might be the best delivery partner for the outcomes we want to achieve. And again, we're having to take into account the new Devolution Act. For example, again, not to go into detail, but around the planning stuff that I'm now getting, which, depending on how those powers are given to me over the next few months, could have an impact on the need for development corporations. Because one of the big powers of development corporations, they have planning powers, right? Yeah. Whereas if I, as mayor, have the ability to issue mayoral development orders, or if I have the ability to call in planning applications from local councils, you can see how that might make development corporations less attractive, because planning then becomes less relevant as a separate body. So all of this is being taken into account. I've asked for a detailed options appraisal from officers for me to assess and review. I haven't had that report yet. I know that's still being worked upon, and I'm hoping, and I can't guarantee this, everybody, but I'm hoping that I'll get a report back by the middle of, hopefully the middle of July, for me to be able to make a decision. I don't think it can really go much beyond that point, largely because of the situation in Hartlepool, because if the decision is to not take Hartlepool forward, or indeed if it is to take it forward, we need to know really by then the financial position of Hartlepool, because it will take some time to do either the wind up or to support it through its transition, because we can't go past the end of the financial year next March. So again, long-winded way of saying it's still outstanding.
From memory, I think Hartlepool was awarded £1 million for it to continue.
Yeah,
just for information for the members, that's what was agreed at the last cabinet meeting, I believe, and that was for 12 months.
Yeah, to allow it to get through its transition, and ideally, for example, work with Hartlepool Council to deliver, for example, the film studios, where the council have, through the town's fund, a significant amount of money to deliver that project. That's been delivered in partnership with the Development Corporation. But again, that £1 million, one, allows us to help get that over the line. It talks about the future Development Corporation, where it can help regenerate the town. But it's all wrapped up in, well, that's all great if we've got a great vision and there's a plan, but do we have the finances to deliver it? And if we do, then great. We need to be really clear that it's got clear finances. What we don't want to do is say, oh, here's a great plan, let's continue, and then we get to a budget setting process at the end of the year, it's run out of money, and then we're coming back to TVC and asking for more money. And I've been clear, and to be fair, and not all, but a number of the leaders have been very clear in that decision when they allocated the £1 million. We were happy to allocate the £1 million, but we were very clear with the Development Corporation that there wouldn't be any more financial support to the Development Corporation going forward.
We've obviously in Hartlepool, we've had a change of leadership in, last month, so that will no doubt put some spokes amongst.
Well, I don't know, to be honest, Chair. So that is also part of the
decision. You don't know.
No, so that part of the decision making is also looking at a political spot and buy-in, and I haven't yet had that conversation with the new leader of the council.
Okay, I'll just let Jim come in before. We shouldn't really, because it's mayoral questions rather than debates.
Well, I'm not debating. I didn't realise it was a fixed order. It was a question.
That's fine.
And Ben looked at me and said, no question. So, Mr. Mayor, and I've just sat through very interesting session, some very informative responses, but I haven't heard the largest borough in the Tees Valley Combined Authorities area, Stockton-on-Tees, mentioned once. And so the question is, the strategic spatial plans that come with the new style mayoral combined authorities, do you anticipate that the needs of that significant part of the area that's currently Stockton-on-Tees borough, would you see that being fully addressed in that strategic plan?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Jim, and obviously working very closely with Lisa and Mike, Chief Executive, is always a huge advocate for the priorities you have as a council. You know, for example, one of the strategic plan is one thing, and you know, the strategic development strategy is going to be very important, but it's also going to be politically contentious. Not because of Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems or anything, or Reform. It's going to be contentious because we could be saying, you know, in a part, I'm not going to name parts because Dan's here and probably end up reporting it, but in a part of the Tees Valley, this area is ripe for housing. Yeah. And everybody's going to kick off and say it's not right for housing, we shouldn't be building any houses here. So it's going to be contentious. But we have to do it. It's part of the requirement. Government are going to make us do it in the same way that local plans are contentious. But hopefully we can pick our way through that. I think from a Stockton point of view, where we're able to potentially get some speed, and I don't think I think I said this last time, but apologies if I didn't, but we're obviously working very closely with Stockton on the new health and social care zone. We'll keep rebranding it slightly, but the health zone around care and health zone around Marshall Yards and on the river around Teesdale, which is kind of phasing on from the work that's been done around the High Street, which is all very positive. The thing I would say about Stockton is it would be really helpful to get some clarity, because we're there to support. I mean, I've got my own views, but I've been very clear to Lisa and to Mike, I'm not here to dictate, and I could take it over if you want me to. Don't think that's the way we want to go. I think we want to do this in a real partnership with the council. And so what I've asked for on a number of occasions, and I haven't yet got clarity on, and it would be helpful not just to me but to the officers on how we engage with Stockton. What's the delivery model for that scheme? Now, you could do everything from the council just doing it and the council going to buy up a load of land. You could set up a subsidiary through the council. You could go out and get private developers, which I know Middlesbrough are looking at doing through some of their regeneration sites. You could do it through to a development corporation to be able to bring the land together and deal with some of the public land issues from Homes England to Network Rail to be able to get hold of the land, which then makes it more deliverable. There are different ways of doing that. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, but we set out all of this to the council, and my clear push every time I meet with Lisa and Mike on this is we need to get some clarity out of you on the delivery model. Because as soon as we understand the delivery model, then we can start running at that and saying, okay, well, if that's the delivery model, this is how we package the land together, this is how we start to design it, this is how we can leverage the transport monies into it, how do we tweak, for example, the £150 million that's been allocated to the Teesside Park train station, can we make better use of that to deliver the outcomes for the Health and Innovation Zone? All of that matters, but it's really important that you can't really do anything of substance until we have a delivery model. Now, I only say that to try and be helpful because the aspiration and the plans coming from Stockton are brilliant. I mean, that has been a key site of the Tees Valley for long before I've ever been there, and it's been a really difficult site to unlock. But with the will from the council, and Mike and Lisa and others, there's a real possibility to unlock a very, very important economic site for our region, and we're desperate to help, but just some more practical detail on the delivery of that, and that could be an incredible thing. And we're even now seeing some more cross-border support from Middlesbrough. So speaking to Chris Cook there, and speaking to Lisa, saying actually because there's a boundary between the marshalling yards, actually there seems to be a bit of a consensus now about how that could be delivered. The question is, what's the forum for that? What's the delivery model? Because we could really accelerate that using the SDS, using planning powers, using Homes England money that we can get access to, brownfield housing money we can access. All of these other things can come once we know the delivery model for that scheme. Because there are lots of great ideas that the council are producing, and I agree with all of them on that project. We just got to get into the practicality of how that's delivered.
I mean, there is a stone housing site. I know it's only small B compared to the Tees marshalling yards, and I think the previous thing was called the Green Blue Heart or the Blue Green Heart. Was that previous vision?
Yeah, there have been lots of visions.
And being at the university and listening about it. But yeah, I'm just, you know, suppose as a small B intention, is there any way that that brownfield site can be unlocked so that I can look out my window and see houses, not cranes?
Is that the one on the edge of the Teesdale?
It's the one that was the former events car park.
Yeah.
You know, next to the barrage.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I don't know the detail of it, but
anything you could do in that quarter would be appreciated.
Yeah.
Both from a council point of view and the resident point of view in terms of it is social housing that was planned for it, and you know that crying need for it in the borough.
And then that's all going to get...
It will improve the aspect of my home.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, that's all going to get folded into this plan. So again, once we get some clarity on the delivery model, then that will be taken care of as part of that wider plan. Is the hope. So, thank you. I'll pick it up with Mike and Lisa as well, because I don't know the detail of that specific thing, but I know it sits kind of in the middle of some of the bigger plans that we have with Stockton on that side. But it also goes down into the railway, so actually going past that as well as into the Teesdale estate as well. There's a lot. Because in theory, what the health zone is talking about is going from the bridge that connects into the High Street now, but right the way along to the flyover. So that does sit kind of in the middle. There's a pretty expansive plan, which would be incredible if we deliver it, which that sits in the middle of, and so will have to be taken into account as the plan once we know what the delivery model is.
Right, thanks for that. I'm going to ask the last question if that's possible, and then we can give it a wrap. We've read quite a lot recently about UK Reef and its successes. What was the combined authority hope to gain from it?
Investment fundamentally, Chairman, and you know it's good to see that in the last couple of years working much more collaboratively with the local councils on being able to not just talk about the big regional priorities that I have and the mayoral priorities, but actually helping and facilitating the more local priorities that each council has. And this time it was good to see all councils take some space and we were able to facilitate some of those activities. I mean, it can always be better, and I've given some feedback to the team on how we could do it better next time. There's always room for improvement, but it's been really encouraging to see over the last couple of years the involvement much more from local councils, and we also do see different engagement from different councils. Some are slightly more geared up for regeneration than others, for all the reasons that you're acutely aware of in local government. Some are starting to gear up a little bit more, which is positive. But to be fair, all councils were there, which is important. It puts us on the map. It allows people outside of the region to understand not just, like I say, the big priorities, but each local authority's priorities. And from the feedback I think I've had from the leaders in all of those different sessions, all of the sessions were really positively received. I think it's fair to say all sessions were good, but the feedback that I got from particularly external investors rather than internally within the organisation is that the City Heart project in Darlington was particularly well received, more for its clarity of outcome and what it's trying to achieve, and obviously it's linked to the Darlington Economic Campus and the station. That is one that other councils might want to look at from a clarity of kind of a delivery point of view to investors in that kind of thing. It feels to me like they probably came out on top on the excitement scale from investors that were in the room.
Very good, thank you very much. Thanks. I want to thank Ben for attending today, even though it was unofficial, or most of it was unofficial. And thanks for your attendance. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.